So welcome. This is the September meetup for Temporal. We have lots of things planned. So I'm going to give you some updates, and then we're going to go right into our special guest, Rob, because I basically did not want to bury the lead. And then we have Tiho presenting his KubeCon talk on temporal DSLs, and he's the maintainer of serverless workflow. So just a lot of expertise to hear from him. And I'm going to present an update / demo of our upcoming SDK, which is hopefully very near a public beta. And then we'll have your Q&A. So feel free to actually just pop in your Q&As asynchronously, because we're gonna want to collect them and answer them. And people from the company are here, so we can answer all your temporal questions, because that's why you're here. I'll just start off with some company updates, or just things you should know if you've been out of the loop for a while. So we do have a transparency report where we go over this. So if you just want to catch up asynchronously, go catch up on our blog. But also, we're coming to our first anniversary of Temporal 1.0, which is September 29th, tomorrow, which also coincides with our end of life of Cadence support, where if you're using Cadence, you should definitely take a look at our blog posts about what we think about migrating. We have some published migration instructions, but it seems like it's been a year, and it seems about time to get this underway. And Temporal V1, I think, has been fairly successful. We're still in the 1.0 phase, and I don't know when 2.0 will ever come out, but when it does, I'm sure we have a lot of new updates prepared for you as well. All right, so Temporal Careers now, we have a bunch of new job listings from the community. I think the main ones to highlight are Wellhive and Descript, but you can access all of these from temporal.io/careers. Okay, yeah. I have a tip from someone who says their mics are on. A lot of people's mics are on. So I don't know if I can control that, if I can mute other people, but just be careful of your noise. We're also hiring, of course, just like everyone else. But I do like to highlight that we run this as a community of open source contributors, right? So if you use Temporal and you want to hire other people who want to use Temporal and work with you, just drop us an email down in here, or send me a message in Slack, and we'll list you here for free. And people who are browsing our jobs page can look at both Temporal jobs and Temporal user jobs. And I think that's a pretty cool thing that we offer for people. Okay, so I have now lost my. There we go. Okay, all right. So next update, I think in 2 weeks, which is surprisingly soon, we're going to be at KubeCon. Please shout out if you're in the States, or you're planning to come to KubeCon. We're going to be there. We're going to have a bunch of activities planned on Friday. So we have Friday from Dominic and Tiho. So Dominic will be talking. Dominic will be talking about Temporal and M3, and then Tiho will be talking about M3, and then Tiho will be talking serverless workflow, which is serverless workflow, part of CSCF, but also but using Temporal. So those would be really interesting conversations. At KubeCon, just let us know if you'll be there. At KubeCon, just let us know if you'll be there. And final update on Thursday. An intro to Temporal workshop. I think a lot of people here. I think a lot of people might be new to Temporal itself. Might be new to Temporal itself, and you might be shy about asking. Hey, what is a Temporal? Like, hey, what is a Temporal? So here's all your. Here's a 2-hour session. Answering all your questions. Answering all your questions. You can have an opportunity to ask. You can have everything from like company stuff to everything from like company stuff to like workflow, and just to go really deep. And just to go really deep. What you should know. What you should know. We'll be there to guide you through. So this Thursday at 9 a.m. This Thursday at 9 a.m. Don't have a separate calendar invite. Don't have a separate calendar invite. So I'll just join our email. So I'll just join our email list, and I'll send out a link. I'll also drop a link in Zoom. I'll also drop a link in Zoom, so you can join. So that's the intro workshop. So that's Mark's intro workshop with Mark. Okay, cool. All right. So without further ado, I know that was a bit. But Rob, if you're ready, I think you can join. Share your screen.
All right, so I'm Rob. I'm a senior software engineer at Netflix. Let's just get started. Hey, I'm going to talk a little bit about where Temporal is used inside of Netflix and what we've done so far to integrate it into the Netflix platform. Temporal is currently used in 2 different places. One is Spinnaker, Netflix's CI and CD product. It's the product that I've been working on since I've been at Netflix. We first started with migrating all of our cloud operations. So if you're unfamiliar with Spinnaker, it's a multi-cloud continuous delivery platform. And so we have dozens and dozens of cloud operations that are written for various cloud providers, AWS, Titus, another cloud called CCaaS inside of Netflix. And we have abstractions above those that allow people to interact with these various cloud providers in the same way. So that had its own orchestration system that we had built in-house, and we have kind of gotten tired of writing our own plumbing and have decided to level up the abstractions that we're dealing with inside of Spinnaker so we can focus on innovating our main charter, which is continuous delivery. We're also going to be changing many, many other things inside of Spinnaker as well to use Temporal, but that's a little bit down the road. The other team that's using Temporal is RTDI. They've written a Flink control plane that allows them to do red, black, or blue-green deployments of Flink, the task manager, the job manager, all that stuff in a safe and controlled manner. And that used to be, yet again, another homegrown system that used Zookeeper and a whole bunch of coordination. And we've just been able to simplify it quite a lot by just the workflow abstraction. Inside of Netflix, we just adopted Temporal at the beginning of this year. We are deployed into 2 different regions in 3 different environments: test, staging, and prod. In US West 2 and US East 1, we use Temporal's XCC replication. We deploy straight onto EC2 VMs, and we use MySQL RDS. We would obviously prefer to use Cassandra. However, due to some internal constraints, we can't depend on other teams' software because we are a tier 0 service. So we use MySQL RDS instead. We have Chaos Monkey enabled for all the different services. So throughout the day, Chaos Monkey will be randomly terminating the matching service, the history service, all that kind of stuff. And it's just our way of ensuring that Temporal is sound given various failure scenarios. We also have done some regional failovers as well. Right now, we have 500,000 production workflows started and completed a day. And we're projecting that to be about 1 million per day by the end of the year. So the Netflix platform, or paved road, is just a foundation of platform services for development and operations of services inside of Netflix. Having any new technology brought into Netflix, it's table stakes to have good integration with these. And so we've extended both Temporal and the SDK for this purpose. As far as Temporal, the service goes, we've added dynamic config integration with a service called Fast Properties. This is just a small service that runs on Cassandra that lets us add dynamic config at various constraint levels, all the way from being a global property that affects every application inside of Netflix, which is not the best, all the way down to individual instances. We can target the constraints however we want, and that actually maps very nicely into the dynamic config extension point that Temporal has. We also have authentication through Metatron MTLS. So we extended, I wish I had actually looked at the extensions when I was writing this, but the certificate extension, we've added that, and also extended the UI for Wally, which is a an authentication proxy. We have a system called Gandalf, which we've extended Temporal to integrate with for authorization as well of namespaces and user groups. We had originally added metrics through dogstatsd. The statsd integration that comes with Temporal wasn't really working for us. So the fine folks at Temporal were able to open up an extension point for that. We started with dogstatsd, but now have moved to the hotel contributor collector, which just lets us modify what comes out of the Prometheus metrics collector. And then, as I mentioned, we've also forked the UI so that we can integrate with our Volley authentication proxy. And very excited for the new UI so that we don't hopefully need to maintain as aggressive of a fork as we do today. And then the Java SDK, we only use the Java SDK. We don't have Node, we don't have Go or anything like that. Since it's just two teams right now that are using Temporal and we both use the JVM, we're happy with just supporting the Java SDK. We've forked the SDK, which we had to do to shade in our own gRPC and Netty libraries. The Netflix platform has our own particular forks of gRPC and Netty, and using those instead of the OSS ones was required for things to work. That wasn't that big a deal because you can do all kinds of fun stuff with Gradle to replace dependencies. We've also integrated it with Spring Boot so that we have all configuration for workers, their thread pools, activities, all that kind of fun stuff. With relatively no configuration, you can just add the dependency and then your application is temporalized. Integrates with service discovery. So if you disable a service inside of Spinnaker or via Spinnaker, that is, it will stop the workers polling and that kind of thing. We also have a traffic routing library that's built on an activity called task queue namer that lets us dynamically route work either from one cluster that's running in AWS or wherever to another cluster, or alternatively sending production traffic down to our laptops and back, which can be useful for migrations of existing functionality. We've got many services inside of Spinnaker, and trying to run all of those on our machine to get an end-to-end experience is tough. So being able to click around inside prod and targeting very specific slices of traffic to send down to your laptop has been useful for just ensuring that the end-to-end experience works well. And then we have also written XCC-aware clients. So rather than interacting with the workflow client, the stubs, all those directly, we have providers where people can just say, I'm in this particular namespace, please give me the client for the active temporal cluster, and it will provide it to you, which is pretty necessary as far as running in an XDC environment. Shouldn't really be up to developers to know which client to be using. So that's just making life a little bit easier for people. For the future, similar to the XDC clients, it would be nice if we didn't have to have that be an application concern at all. So we've been thinking a little bit about a global XDC proxy that would just implement the temporal API and do the routing at the service level rather than at the application level. We have a little bit more SDK enhancements to do, namely integrating open tracing with our platform tracing libraries, and then a workflow registry. We are standardizing on Temporal for most extension, like plugin aspects of Spinnaker, and Spinnaker needs to know what workflows are out there for people that are adding new functionality to us. So this will be basically like a plugin repository or what have you that will allow us to query the state of the world inside Netflix and route particular traffic where we need to. And I would just like to plug that we are very interested in one-on-one chats with other companies in the temporal community. We really like to get deeper into our use cases and talk to other people and how they're approaching continuous delivery or operations of temporal, or even just use cases totally outside of what we're doing today. It's just a nice way to network and share ideas. So if you're interested, please DM me in Slack. That is it. Thanks.
It's amazing. I love the templates that Netflix people have. It's always so on brand.
Well, thank you. I didn't make them.
Rob, if you don't mind taking some questions.
Sure.
Yeah. So if anyone has questions on adoption or any further detail on the custom stuff that Rob has done, please feel free to drop some questions in the chat. But I'll just lead off with something. What has been the most surprising benefit of adopting Temporal?
Surprising benefit. It's not really surprising so much as just it's been a very refreshing benefit, is that while you do have to, error handling is a very important aspect to Temporal, it's not nearly as arduous as it was in our previous systems. Just the natural flow of writing business logic with Temporal is much nicer than what we had before. So being able to look at code and grok what's going on has been immense. That's for me the best thing.
Is it from the programming model side or the sort of observability from the UI side?
From the programming side.
Yeah. Programming side, got it.
And I guess actually a surprising thing, it's hard to come into a system that you don't intimately know and operate it. I had run Spinnaker at my previous company, and that was very, very difficult. Whereas with Temporal, it's been surprisingly easy to run it once we actually had it running. To be able to keep it running well has been pretty much a breeze. So that's been very nice.
That's excellent. We'll try to make it even easier, hopefully. I think there's some questions in the chat, so I'm gonna go through them one by one. One of these is a sort of context question. What was the system you were replacing with Temporal? I think you maybe breezed past that in your intro.
Sure. So Spinnaker was written traditionally with all homegrown orchestration. Back when we first started, it was written with Spring Batch, and that was not the best system because it made all of our services stateful. And so we migrated to writing our own distributed task queue and building an orchestration system on top of that. So we've replaced this homegrown, or actually are in the process of replacing our homegrown orchestration system.
Amazing. Okay, that's from Anup Chatterjee, by the way. Jens Foscaro. It would be nice to hear a bit more about the traffic routing functionality. We've been having similar thoughts about connecting to processes running in our cloud environments when debugging certain workflows. So more on traffic routing.
More on traffic routing. Okay, let's see. So we have standardized on this activity called the task queue namer. It's a very, very simple activity interface. it takes a name and then it gives you a new name. So you
Wow.
might say, yeah, right. So it will look at your environment, be it like the activity implementation is able to look at MDC information. If you're on Java, that's like thread local information about a request. That also has information on like the data center, cloud, just environment variables in general. And so we have our integration with fast properties where people can add new fast properties that say like, I want this, let's say cloud driver operations is one of our task queues. I want to rename cloud driver operations when it's coming from the user or Zienert.netflix.com. And when I'm looking at this particular application inside of Spinnaker, and I want to route it to my laptop. And then this activity will just rename the task queue and drop it onto a convention-based task queue name that is what my laptop's listening to. So there's another side on the SDK that we have. So when we're running on our laptop, it will automatically set up a different task queue namer that prefixes everything with our email address. So everything just kind of like stitches together when the fast properties are there. So I can write something in the temporal community forums if that would be helpful. It's kind of hard to explain without showing examples. It is kind of a complex feature that we have. Yeah, it's mostly just dynamic config driven and conventions-based task queue naming.
Yeah. It's interesting because I've never heard of a task queue namer, but this could be an interesting pattern that we develop and show people. But I think something that maybe people aren't really aware of is that task queues are very lightweight. So it's actually it's not very costly to just throw up a new task queue just for routing on demand. And that's something that maybe it's like an advanced pattern that we can start popularizing more. You do have to automate workers to pick those up as well, though. So it's not, there's like kind of it's like a two-sided equation, right?
Yeah, it's a two-sided equation, and we might put more effort into it. Maybe it's kind of nice that it's a bit of a pain right now because it is a foot gun waiting to happen.
What is? Sorry, what's the foot gun?
Traffic routing. Like let's say, like right now, you could just route everything in production to your laptop, and that would be not good. So we have some more work to do around it, but right now the kind of pain to get both sides to work is kind of a nice forcing function to make you really think about like exactly what traffic you're going to be shifting.
Got it. Okay, we have a couple more questions. I don't think we can go too long. We have a question from Rupali Vora on scaling or length of workflows. So you mentioned having 500,000 workflows starting and finishing per day. Do you have workflows that run longer than a day? And do you have any scaling difficulties that come with that?
We do have some workflows that run longer than a day. But for the most part, our workflows, since it's just cloud operations, are pretty short-lived. Like on the order of sub 1 minute if there's no activity retries. The only place that we have long workflows is in this kind of experimental feature right now that dynamically orchestrates regional rollouts. So being able to take signals from various places inside the Netflix platform to decide which AWS region we're going to deploy to next, or if we're going to deploy to a particular region. Deployments can take a long time, depending on what the application owner needs. So that's one particular workflow that's going to run for a long time. We're looking at some new use cases that will probably be workflows that run forever. But right now, since it's all short-lived workflows, there's not really anything to worry about on a scaling front. It's just a throughput issue.
Yeah, gotcha. And if you do run into trouble, obviously we're around to help. So Rupali, if there's a reason that you asked that, let us know in the chat as well. If you're working on something that you're facing trouble with, I'm sure Rob would be happy to dig into it as well, because it looks like he's exploring that. Oh yeah, thanks Rupali. We have a question from a former guest, Shannon. So Shannon says, when you're working on the custom stuff, do you have conversations with the temporal engineering team to vet the idea?
Yes, sometimes. We've been approaching it mixed, like a mixed bag. Sometimes we know the pattern is simple enough that we don't really need to bother the temporal folks, but we're looking to replace our pipeline engine, which is a DSL that will be on our workflows, and that's something that we will be interacting with the temporal team on. When we were designing the cloud operation stuff, that was also vetted through the temporal folks. We just kind of try to respect their time, but also verify with them that what we're doing is sound.
Yeah, and on our end, we're perfectly willing, happy to help, especially because you give us a lot of ideas on stuff that we should probably support better or build in-house, or at least just learn about that. Hey, there's this use case that we might want to design for in the future. So for example, I think something that caught my eye with your last slide was the registry, a workflow registry, which could be interesting, as something that is close enough to something that we already do as a necessary part of running temporal, that we could make easier for you. All right, so I think there are a bunch of other questions. Well, I think we'll just kind of leave it there. If any last things to plug, by the way, any favorite Netflix shows or any jobs that you're hiring for?
Jobs, there's plenty of jobs if you're interested in platform level things, but for temporal specifically, there's no positions open from a Netflix side of things. I would recommend Squid Game.
Squid Game,
yeah, it's a Korean limited series. It's very, very good. I'm only halfway through the season. It just came out, but it's very good. And also there's new episodes of Great British Bake Off, which you have to watch. So
you're getting a lot of support for Squid Game in the chat already. Maybe we should just make this a Squid Game meetup.
Riley, I thought you came on because you heard your trigger word, which is Great British Bake Off.
No, that is a very good show, though.
Okay, perfect. Rob, thank you so much for taking some time to present on your experience. And I'm sure there are a couple more questions in the chat that you can answer asynchronously, but I just didn't want to put you on the spot for too long. Thank you so much. All right. That was wonderful. I just love it when people have the opportunity to share their experience, and we kind of run this meetup for the community. So if you're interested in sharing your experience with Temporal, and presenting, what it's like at your company or your use case, just hit me up and we'll schedule you for one of the upcoming meetups. Okay, so next up we have Tiho. I did have a pretty slide that was shared, but Tiho, you just want to go ahead and share it? Like you're the expert.
Go ahead. Can you guys hear me?
All right,
I'll go ahead.
Yes, I can.
Yay! Well, that was great. And it's hard to follow up, but I'll try. I have some slides on my own, and we're going to take a look at a quick demo. But just to give you an introduction, I've been around kind of DSLs or domain-specific languages for a long time. I was a long-time BPMN kind of guy. I've been working on that for over 10 years. And about 2-3 years ago, I started a project called Serverless Workflow over at CNCF. So they kind of gave me an idea of how to define workflows using, for example, JSON and YAML. We'll take a look. And then in the last 7-8 months now almost, been working at Temporal, defining workflows with programming languages. So I've been kind of all over the place and kind of gather some information that I wanted to kind of share with you guys. I wanted to not make this specific to a certain DSL. As we know, a lot of people use different ones. People define them all the time, small and large scales. So I kind of wanted to get put it on a level of pretty much running any DSL on top of Temporal. 1 second. Oh, sorry, I kind of jumped the gun. But typically we have 3 ways most of the time defining some sort of the very specific language in terms of workflow. One is flowchart based, when you have, for example, editors and you drag and drop boxes and circles and triangles and things like that onto the canvas to define your business processes. And other ways is like form based. For example, you have web UIs where you can enter in some information and also has some drag and drop functionality of how to define some sort of a control flow logic that you want to execute as far as a workflow goes. And then you have the more DSL type of languages that are expressed with JSON and YAML. For example, everybody probably knows AWS States language or Google now, Google Cloud Workflow and stuff like that. And those are kind of used more and more, but a lot of people can define their own. DSLs are typically very, as the name says, domain specific, and fit into that type of niche where you want to define a language that's not very large, but is specifically targeting some sort of technology that you're targeting your applications. Usually for flowchart-based and form-based languages, so we go from these editors where you draw a stuff or web forms, you have a translation step into some sort of markup. And again, typically that's done either JSON YAML in case of kind of XML too, but it's kind of dying off. With, you know, the typical more JSON YAML type of based DSLs, you don't have to have that translation stuff. The next step you typically have within these DSLs is a parsing step from this markup into some object model that includes information about the instructions or the information that you want to execute, and also defines the control flow logic as far as the ordering of execution of the steps or states or tasks or the many different terms that people use in DSLs. As far as running that on Temporal is we can take this object model or even, you know, take straight the JSON or the YAML or the markup and alongside with some workflow data inputs, so, you know, you can gather that info there again from the user on the website, or it can be delivered through a messaging system through, let's say, a signal or an event. And this object model or the representation of the originally defined DSL in many different ways can be interpreted and executed by workflow in a set of activities in your application. Of course, application is communicating with the temporal server. So you have right out of bat, you know, for your DSLs, the many different benefits, you know, such as dealing with events, the timer, storage, queuing, and everything else that Temporal brings to the game. So that's kind of on a high level. Of course, there's different ways of doing this if you want, but kind of a description of that. Now, a little bit about serverless workflow, because the demo that I will show is going to be using it. But again, this can be any DSL. But as far as CNCF serverless workflow goes, it's been around for about 2.5 years. It's a CNCF project. It's currently sandbox going into incubation, hopefully soon, and here's some information. Now, why this DSL? Typically, DSLs, they're kind of targeting the serverless technology, are oftentimes very proprietary, and I named before a few of them, or they're, you know, very particular to a certain community or organization or company. So what at CNCF we're trying to do is define an open source, vendor neutral, and community driven DSL ecosystem. So everything that you typically have to pay for, we want to provide for free. So it includes a specification, which is you can define your workflows in JSON YAML. It has a set of SDKs. Now, those are not like temporal SDKs, but these really are kind of SDKs that really deal with like marshalling and unmarshalling the JSON or the YAML, provide things like utilities, validation, and also we see things like little graphical representation of your workflows itself. Why more? It's like, again, DSLs are typically very, if you've used others, you'll see they're very particular to the cloud provider, for example, and the functionality they provide to you are very specific to that. So as far as this specification goes, again, we try to make it standards-based. So you'll see for eventing, it's kind of enforced using cloud events, and for execution of functions, instead of defining your own things, it tries to use some sort of standards. But anyways, so, whoa, this slide is a little bit bad, but anyways. So as far as a case study, temporal as a DSL runtime, one thing that I found out during my work is, or trying to do this demo, is it's actually very perfectly suited for any DSL. As far as the control flow logic goes, what the temporal SDKs provides, of course, being based on the programming language approach to write your workflows, is always going to be a superset of any DSL that you possibly have, even the largest ones that you can probably think of. And you can, of course, deal with any type of things like loopings, parallel execution, conditional evaluations, error handling, timeouts, all this stuff you already, you can already execute as you define it in DSL. But on top of that, you have out-of-box support for a lot of different things, like automatic retries, which a lot of different workflow runtimes do not include. Compensation, if you have a DSL where you define compensation logic, you can easily execute it on temporal as well. Schedule starts, cron job, sync async invocation, and all these different things that you can do. But on top of that, you also have the ability of the temporal server, for example, rate limiting and scalability and stuff like that, that you can also introduce on top of everything else that you can do. So just to kind of give a little bit of high-level picture, on the left-hand side, we see kind of not a real workflow, but a structure of the workflow, at least in DSL, using the serverless workflow DSL, but it could be yours as well. And there is a mapping that kind of makes sense. For example, the ID, defined in the DSL could correspond to your workflow ID that in temporal that you execute the workflow with. For example, the name in DSL could translate in the workflow type. Now, this is not a must. I'm just kind of giving examples to kind of give you guys an idea of how you can start approaching your mapping from your DSL to the particular functionality in temporal. Now, let's see, where am I? Okay, go ahead. So, for example, one of the things in this particular DSL has option of auto retries. A lot of in serverless, sometimes you want auto retry, sometimes you don't. Of course, with temporal, you get automatic retries of activities, but maybe in your DSL, you want to specify that you don't want to retry by default, which then when you create your activity options, you can, for example, set maximum attempts to 1 and things like that. Another thing that this DSL provides is reusable function definitions. So how do you invoke third-party services using these standards like Open API, Async API, things like that. And you could also define if you want to execute them sync or async, which you can do in temporal. Events, how does your data get into something if you're in your applications or is consumed? In DSL, you can define things like events. It could be based on cloud events or whatever, and delivered in many different ways. And those translate into signals in temporal, of course. And things like retries, retriable, non-retriable errors in error handling, workflow activities, timeout options that, as you guys know, there's many of those that you can specify with temporal that can be also represented easily. And then also things like control flow logic. In the serverless workflow DSL, they call them states and different ones, like I said, tasks or steps or whatever. But you can actually translate those into many different control logic blocks of the programming language that you actually implement your temporal workflows with. So these are just some. On the bottom left, you see the different types of states or control flow logic blocks that you can build with this DSL, and each one can translate into some particular control flow logic that you can represent all of them with a programming language as well. Just one more, a little bit deeper before we go into the short demo as well. On the left-hand side, we have an implementation of this state of a control logic block. And I just wanted to give a little bit deeper insight. For example, in this case, we have a workflow state called get credit score. and it's of type, and I'm losing my mouse, it's type operation. So there, for example, an operation state in this DSL means it's a particular control flow logic block where we want to start invoking third-party services. And in temporal, of course, this is not a must, but there's many different ways to interpret. We can start saying, okay, we're going to need a new activity or one or more activity stubs that we want to create in our workflow execution. The second thing is, for example, activity mode. You can choose in this DSL to execute your activities, or in this case called actions, asynchronous, as a pipeline, or parallel. So of course, on the right-hand side with temporal, you can, this is all Java examples, by the way. you can find similarly in any other of the temporal SDKs. You can, for example, also invoke activities sync or async. Now, another thing as far as actions goes, they reference one of the reusable function definitions. So in this case, what this action says is we want to invoke the Equifax service to get the Equifax credit score. This can translate in direct in temporal into invocation of, for example, this Equifax activity that we can define, and to pass it in some data. And again, this can be executed sync or async. Retry defs, okay, they translate into retry options in temporal. So as you see, there is always an ability to really define complex DSLs that can run on top of temporal and can use many of the different things that temporal offers you to do. For example, we can define on the left-hand side in our DSL that after we invoke this Equifax service, we want to sleep for 2 seconds, for example. The same thing, we can translate that into a workflow sleep in our workflow definition in temporal. Temporal supports child workflows. They're called different names in different DSLs, but in this DSL, they're called subflows. So, it's just like you can invoke a function that calls a third-party service, you can also, in your actions or temporal activities, invoke child, or in a workflow, invoke child workflow. So that could translate into that. Timeouts, here on you can define a DSL where you can really say, okay, I want my action execution or the execution of activities to take up to 5 seconds. So, for example, that you can translate that into, again, activity options and set the timeouts there. So I kind of wanted to show that temporal is really well suited for basically any DSL, and whether that be a very small one that you're exposed to a user, so a very complex one, like, for example, huge ones like BPMN, they can all be translated in some way or the other into workflows that can be defined with temporal as well. So anyways, just that was the slides. For the demo, you can run this yourself. This is the GitHub URL, and it's still a work in progress, but I wanted to show it and kind of figure out what you guys think. So let me go ahead first run this thing. And this demo runs on Quarkus. You can run it on Spring Boot as well, and it's integration between the CNCF serverless workflow DSL and the temporal Java SDK in this case. All right, so thing is started. So let's go ahead and go to 8080. And one of the things with the serverless workflow specification, what it tries to do is tries to mimic this common user experience that people have using this JSON or YAML-based DSLs, but to give it to you for free. So you have, for example, on the left-hand side, an editor. Now this uses the VS Code JavaScript that's free that you can define. But the cool thing is, because of this DSL is based on a JSON schema, you can actually have code completion and stuff like that. So here, that help you to actually define, and your users, if you expose this to the users, to write these workflows with, making probably fewer mistakes and being able to know. And also, if you have like things like, it has validation built in and things like that. And I think also, it has validation of the states. For example, if we remove a required field from this guy, for example, we should probably get an error here that says missing missing. So it's backed by a JSON schema that can provide a lot of support in for your tooling. Now on the right hand side, you see the little image. This is using Mermaid.js, and one of our serverless workflow SDKs. It's also TypeScript. We have also users have added support for defining a diagram based on the JSON defined in our workflow. So anyway, so just quick to run through the demo. Here is a little, and you can select it here. If you change something and you want to get back to actually running the demo when you're doing this yourself, you can just select it from here. And you can click on the workflow button if you make any changes here in the editor, and then it will update to show you the updated diagram. But the idea here is basically that we have a customer application workflow where we get some customer information. And what this workflow does is basically it waits on an event. This can be a cloud event or any type of event that can translate into signal invocation, sending a signal to our workflow. And then we have two basically functions that we execute in parallel, as you can also see here. These are the new customer application state, and it invokes some customer information function and some update function in parallel. And then it makes a decision. Basically, this is a switch state that says, okay, this is very simple in the demo. If my age of the customer data that we provide is greater than 20, we want to go ahead and approve this application. And if it's less than 20, we want to reject this. So it's very simple. Now, this uses JSON path. Well, usually with DSLs, our data is in JSON in most of the time, not always, but in this case, the whole data structure of the workflow execution is represented in JSON. So you have to use things like expression languages, such as JSON path or whatever else. JQ is a very important, big one, and things like that. So anyways, on the bottom, we have then the ability to run our workflow. And we can just add in some data. And let's say this guy is 33 years old and a request to purchase a laptop, let's say. We run this workflow. It's going to run the workflow exposed in a REST endpoint. And we can actually, if I can see, go to our Temporal web UI. Let's go to last 10 minutes. And we see that our serverless workflow, this is a unique ID of Temporal serverless workflow, was completed. And we can look at the input, which is our John Wayne request to purchase a laptop. We can look at the history that tells us exactly what activities. So we updated and check customer info and updated it in parallel. And then we call the approve request activity based on the definition in our DSL as far as the conditions goes. So on the right-hand side, we got the response from the workflow or the response of the workflow execution. We see the decision was to approve this particular request. And we can also see the entire results, which again are going to be JSON when we're dealing with this particular DSL. Yeah, so that's all I had. If you guys have any questions, let me know. Thank you.
Amazing. I actually had a applause thing lined up. Let's see if this works.
Thank you so much.
I mean, we got to do what we can in a Zoom meetup, like, just to create the atmosphere. 60 people here. I think it is a new record for us. Okay. We don't have that much time, so I'm just going to blast through my demo because I know you all have questions about Temporal. Feel free to ask Tiho in the chat for stuff regarding DSLs, serverless workflow, Java, SDK, really anything that he does. He's got quite a lot of videos on our YouTube as well, if you want to check that out. So I'm going to give you a brief intro to the Node or TypeScript SDK that we're putting out. And by the way, the short URL that we've implemented now is temporal.io/node. The other languages also have a similar URL. And when you go there, you can see that we've basically completely reworked the docs. So it's hopefully easy to follow. Let me know if it's not. We do have some dependencies that you have to install at first, but it's pretty much as simple as running these couple commands to scaffold up a hello world, which is awesome. We've also tried to identify what a core API means for Temporal. So you should understand workflows and activities, of course, but also workers, signals and queries. And this timers is a new thing, which I'm trying to see if like we can popularize. It's weird because they're not a huge set of APIs to this. It's literally just essentially sleep. But the design patterns that can come out of this, I think, could be very interesting. So that's kind of the focus of my demo. But anyway, if you're interested in the Node SDK, check out temporal.io/node. Basically, we are looking to go into public beta soon. The reason it's a beta and not a general availability is because we're still working on the test suite. So we kind of don't want to bless it for a general availability until we figure out the testing story and make it easy for you as much as the other SDKs. So the demo that I've put together is actually inspired by Amazon, which is where Maxime originally started his journey in asynchronous or message queue development. And this is a story from Joel Spolsky, who is actually the founder of Stack Overflow. And in 2009, he gave this talk where he talked about the buy now with one click button in Amazon. He actually told the story about how one click came about at Amazon. So Jeff Bezos said that, you want to change the paradigm from a synchronous click to add to shopping cart and then click to checkout from shopping cart to something asynchronous, right? So you're clicking to buy in one click, but then you set a timer invisibly in the back end to give you some grace period to cancel. And I think that's an interesting pattern that repeats itself quite a bit in terms of improving user experience. You want to switch from synchronous to asynchronous, so you give instant feedback, but then you want to be able to set up timers in the back end. And so that's kind of what I've replicated here with Next.js. And you can see essentially, I've just set up like a one-click purchase, and it wasn't, it's just surprising how little code it takes. So I have a buy now thing, and I gave myself a 5-second timeout actually to essentially change my mind. And once it confirms, it's purchased there. But if I ever want to cancel, I can just click to cancel, and that cancels it as well. I think I have to get rid of this as well. And there's a little bug here because I just set this up yesterday. But basically, what I wanted to show was essentially especially for JavaScript people who are very likely to also handle front end, I wanted to show integration of Temporal with Next.js. And Next.js is kind of the predominant JavaScript framework at least right now, right this second. And how we handle it essentially is that we use Temporal as a monorepo. I'm going to increase the fonts because I know that is a problem when it's streaming. So Next.js, this is the Next.js repo over here. There's the Next.js pages and the Temporal as a folder. So we're essentially using Next.js as a monorepo, and all the Temporal code lives inside of a single folder with a worker as well. And so we run this separately from the overall Next.js server, which can be deployed as serverless functions. So over here, we can actually use each of these serverless functions, if I can show it correctly. And that's how we fire off signals. Every signal is a serverless function essentially, and we can start off a workflow also inside of a serverless function. So it's a nice blend of server full and serverless inside of a single repo. That might be an interesting pattern. And we'll be looking to build out more of these. So I'm going to wrap up right now because I do have to, I just ran out of time. But if you want more examples, it's already committed in here inside of Temporal.io samples node, and check it out. And yeah, I think we can open it up to questions now because we are almost running out of time. But does anyone have questions? And feel free to unmute yourself. Rupali, you want to ask a question live and I can answer your question?
Yeah, I'm wondering why there is a single folder constraint. And I think some people tried to mess around with it. And there were also some like constraints on how the files were structured. So I'm curious about like why that is. Okay.
The single folder constraint, I think I know what you mean, but basically it's being worked on right now. We need one place to register all the workflows and activities, and we could make it an array. We just haven't got around to it yet. yeah, I mean, let me know if like there's a specific use case or a demo that you've tried to model and couldn't. But yeah, it's just not been a priority because we're working on more sort of core API issues.
Yeah, no, I am super excited for the beta launch and whatever comes after that. So keep on chugging. I appreciate it.
I appreciate that too. I'll reach out to you separately for more feedback. All right, who else has questions? Temporal in general, because you have the whole team here. This is your shot to ask stuff. Prestoin, are you used to see? What's your opinion about using a state machine such as XState inside a workflow? You could if it helps you model your states, but I don't find it necessary for at least simple stuff like the stuff I just showed you. And I think it's an opinion how you want to manage your state, really. So I don't have a strong opinion there. I will say that Stately, the founders of XState, is actually chatting with us about collaborating on some demos at least, and maybe using us as well. So I think that could be an interesting collaboration there for the state machine troop of JavaScript. Okay, Christopher Russell. Next.js is used to serve front-end and browser communicates with Temporal. Yes, and Next.js also serves the API routes. So let me show you here. So it's not Next.js is not just the front end; it also serves API routes as well. So this is the front end. Here's all the React code, and then this is kind of quote unquote the back end or the front of the back end, where we're essentially sending signals to a ephemeral workflow client. And all this is coordinated by workflow IDs. So you need to understand how to set up a workflow and then pick it up later on in a separate process, which is a fairly interesting pattern that maybe we need to promote more. Okay, awesome. Yeah, and we're kind of thinking about, there's nothing in our implementation that like strictly ties to Node. Well, there's a little bit, but if Deno ever becomes more of a popular runtime, then we're open to the idea of running on Deno. I think we could just call it there. We're kind of over time. We'll stick around for any last minute questions, but otherwise that's it for September meetup. See you again next last Tuesday of the month.
I don't know if you can hear me. I just wanted to say thanks for this. I've been new to this. I've been involved in this space for a long time anyway. I'm going to take it offline and try and follow up with some of you guys separately, but super interesting. I think I found my people.
Oh, we're happy to have you here too. So yeah, come chat with us in Slack, and we'll meet over many days. Okay, all right. Well, sounds like it's it for questions. Thank you so much, and have a great day, everyone. Bye.